Hey guys, so it's a big day. This is my first review, and I picked a doozy. Let's just say that. The book I'm going to be reviewing today is Infinite Jest. There you go, by David Foster Wallace. So let me give you a little background about why I decided to read this book. I'd always heard of David Foster Wallace in I've taken a lot of creative writing classes and a lot of more advanced English classes in school since I've started, and I always hear him talked about, reverentially, like he's the patron saint of writers, and people do kind of treat him like that. And I was and everyone talked about how his books were really hard to get through, and obviously I took it as a challenge. So that's why this is like sort of his seminal work. It's one of the only no, I don't want to say that. It's just one of his most famous books. He also had a book that came out, I think, in 2010 called The Pale King, which you'll find out in just a minute, was not finished. So, yeah, here, I took many notes on this. So, let's first talk about David Foster Wallace, who's born February 21st, 1962, in New York. And he went to Amherst for college, and then he got a master's at U of A. And I'm not sure if this was at Amherst or at U of A, but was focused in English and philosophy, or majored in English and philosophy with a focus on modal logic and math, which sort of explains a lot in the book. And then from his first novel, The Broom of the System, he was like getting high praise, and there was a buzz generated about him. And then he sort of flip-flopped from school to school, from university to university as a professor. And then Infinite Jest was published in 1996. Before Infinite Jest was published and came out, he had developed kind of a reputation for writing a lot of thought-provoking short stories in a lot of magazines. I don't want to name any off the top of my head because I can't remember the specific ones, but those important magazines. So then he actually committed suicide in September of 2008, and it was believed that he did so. He'd been suffering from depression for a very long time, and he succumbed to it. So, like I said, his last novel, his most recent novel, The Pale King, was actually released in 2011, and it was unfinished and released posthumously. A little bit more about him as a writer. Like, one of his major themes is irony, and his biggest. I read this in a couple of places, and also it's something that I definitely felt coming out of Infinite Jest, that he really likes to play with the idea of people trying to connect with other people in an era like ours, where there's just too much communication. There's just so much technology and too many ways of getting in touch with people, that when we do get in touch with them, we really don't feel the same way as one might have in past times. Another method that he uses a lot is footnotes and endnotes. In the foreword at the beginning of my version of Infinite Jest, which is written by Dave Eggers, another sort of seminal author of this generation. I don't say this time period because our current time period. Dave Eggers writes about how he got so frustrated reading the book because there are so many footnotes, but they're endnotes because they're at the end of the book, and so you have to keep switching around. And I was just saying, even Dave Eggers finds these footnotes difficult to deal with. But in an interview, David Foster Wallace said that they're obviously very deliberate, and they serve to break up the linear narration, linear in quotation marks for this book, to sort of get the perspective that he thinks he has on the situation. He thinks in a very disjointed way. So he wanted you to really get his perspective on the situation and sort of give you that feeling with the endnotes. Okay, now let's talk about Infinite Jest. I'm going to try and give you a brief summary of what it's about. It's about a bunch of characters, but let's start with the first one who's introduced, just Hal and Cadenza. And he goes to a tennis academy. It's called Enfield Tennis Academy. Enfield is a fictitious place made up for the book. And his family runs it. His dad started it, and his family lives there. So it's actually really interesting. I find athletes fascinating, especially the Olympics are happening now, and I find that training so fascinating. So those parts are actually really interesting to me and very straightforward about the tennis academy. But it turns out that his father, James Incandenza, was a filmmaker, and he made a bunch of really weird and obscure films. And he's dead now. Sorry, that's kind of an important fact. His father's dead now, and one of his last films has become sort of the subject of an investigation by some members of some governments. And Hal also has two brothers, Oren and Candenza, who is a football player, and you almost don't even understand that he's a football player at the beginning because football is so strange in this new world, but he's a football player, and he's estranged from the family for some mysterious reason. And then he has a little brother. No. Then Hal's the youngest, and then Mario is the middle. But Mario has a lot of physical disabilities and mental disabilities. Hal's mother is still alive, and she's sort of taken over the academic side of the tennis academy. And her half-brother, Charles Tavis, takes over as regular dean from the father who died, James Incandenza. And there's a bunch of, that I'm going to say this is not, maybe not totally correct because there's a couple of other major characters, but the action sort of revolves around that. So like I said, this book takes place in the near future of 1996, and there's some debate over what actual years the years in the book represent. I'm not going to get into that because it's not really important because it doesn't have any relation to things that happen today. So I'm going to tell you a couple important things about the time period. I think that they're kind of interesting, so I think that they might tantalize you a little bit. North America has come together into one, my dog. Jasper! He told me he was going to be quiet. Can you be quiet, please? Into one country, I believe. It's the ONAN. I can't tell you what it stands for. It's terrible, but it usually just says ONAN. Countries sort of come to the end realizing that we have to deal with our pollution problem and our waste problem, and America comes up with a creative solution involving Canada, and so it sort of increases tension between the two countries. And like I mentioned, the years have been rented out basically to advertisers because with the advent of this new type of viewing entertainment, which Hal's father really takes advantage of, there's no real way to get to consumers anymore, so that's one of the ways that they do that. And most of the action, just to give you an idea of these years, takes place during the year of the Depend adult undergarment. Something that I also found out when I was sort of researching David Foster Wallace is that he is known for using long multi-clause sentences, and I definitely felt that in the book because obviously there's a lot of words in this book because it's so long, but there are words that he's made up and things like that, but for the most part, a lot of the words are they're not difficult. But sometimes I read books aloud to myself when I'm having trouble focusing on them, and it was like a tongue twister. I don't know why. It was just so many things just tripping all over themselves. These sentences were rushing to get out, and I thought that was like an interesting style that he has. Sort of almost like a run-on conversation style, and it's kind of interesting because the book is partly about drug addiction, and you can definitely feel like you're sitting across from a crazy guy in the subway and he's just literally speaking nonstop this story to you. That's kind of a smart, crazy drug addict is just reading this to you. Not even reading it, he's just telling it to you. That's kind of how it feels. The thing that I liked the most about this book is actually the discussion of it afterward. And what I mean is, when I finished the book, I was totally crazy. I had no idea what had just happened. I was just like, oh my God, what did I just do? I just spent so long reading this book. I have no idea what just happened. So confused. So obviously I went to the internet, and first off, I found two separate books, one that's like 100 pages and one that's like 500 pages about readers' guides to Infinite Jest. And I believe the first one, the 100-page one, I was going to go get it from the library, but I did find a lot of stuff online eventually, so I didn't get it. But it is available at my school library, so I think it might be available at most larger libraries. It's just sort of an exploration of the book as a whole, but the second book, the over 500-page one, literally goes through each chapter and like breaks down things that happen and the significance and stuff. And I found a bunch of websites that explain stuff that happens in the book and that can be used as guides. And I love that stuff. Like, one of my favorite TV shows was Lost, and I just loved it because it was only an hour-long show. But then when it was done at night, I would go on the message boards and I would learn about all the crazy, like, Easter eggs and things that were hidden and things to find out about the show, which was, it's not quite the same with this book because it's more like, writing trope Easter eggs and like what did he drop here and the foreshadowing here and stuff like that. But still very interesting to me as a reader. And it was really fun because, like, even though I did spend a large amount of time on the book, then I got to spend a large amount of time thinking about it and learning more about it. And so I'm going to leave a lot of those links down below, because if any of you decide to undertake the challenge of reading Infinite Jest, I really suggest helping yourself along with those things. And I honestly think that I might buy that guidebook, the 500 plus page guidebook, and read this again maybe in like a year when I've recovered. Petting my dog, just in case you're wondering what's going on here. She won't leave me alone. This is a very ambitious undertaking for my first book review, and this is by no means a definitive review. As you can tell, I didn't really make an opinion of it either way because I'm still kind of figuring it out myself. I just hope that you guys might see that it's not that difficult to read books like this, although I did talk about how it's really difficult a lot of the times. But just because you finish a book and you don't quite understand what just happened, there's always resources to figure out what's going on and what you missed and things like that, and you can always read it again. Some keywords for Infinite Jest. It's definitely historically significant because David Foster Wallace is an incredibly important author, an incredibly important figure in the literary world. I would also classify this book as a bizarre book. It challenges the places where you're going to stretch your imagination to, and definitely an absurd type of book. This is also an adventure book. I don't mean an adventure book as in an adventure happens in it, but you will definitely have to go on an adventure to read it. You can't just sit there in your bed and read it like once every week before you go to bed. You're going to have to actively read it. You're probably going to have to look some things up. You're going to have to sit there and say what just happened and sort of remind yourself about things. You're going to have to take notes, and you're probably going to have to look up some stuff afterwards. But I promise you, that is such a rewarding way to read books or to watch TV, to get actually involved in things that happen. And there's a place for all kinds of books, but isn't it great that, like, let's just put it in simplest terms, you spent however much money on this book, and it's going to reward you beyond. You're going to get more than just that out of it. You're going to get more than just the reading of the book. You're going to get to participate in all these interesting discussions about it. That is my review of Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, my very ambitious first full book review. I really hope you guys enjoyed, and please subscribe, please comment, tell me if you liked Infinite Jest, if you hated Infinite Jest, if maybe you're thinking of reading it now, and tell me if this review is helpful at all. I'm obviously very new to this, so I'm still working out the kinks, but I tried to get some interesting information about the book that would maybe inspire you to read it. So please subscribe, please comment, and please come back. Bye!